Okay, welcome everyone to this evening's meeting of the White Allies Network, where we are focusing on decolonisation. So, the second in our series on this subject, and we are focusing on decolonising the curriculum this evening. And we're delighted that Rob Taylor, one of our network members, is going to be leading us by example. Actually, he's going to share from what he's been doing in his children's school, along with colleagues from Exeter University. It's Black History Month. I don't know what your feelings are about Black History Month. People have mixed feelings sometimes, thinking, well, it's a shame that we have to have it. Maybe a sign of success will be when we don't need to talk about Black History Month, but actually Black History is part of our historical curriculum anyway. But I don't want to steal Rob's thunder on that one a little bit later. But you're very welcome, whether you're here for the first time or whether you've been coming for the last 3.5 years since we started the network. My name is Adrian Locke. I'm the network coordinator. And just to mention, we do record these sessions. At the same time, if there's anything that you say during the session that you'd rather not be on the recording, I'm also the editor of the recording. And so please let me know if there's anything that you prefer not to be on the recording, which goes on both the White Allies Network website, but also my Deeper Leaders website, which is my business that funds this network. So welcome, everybody. A little bit about what's on the agenda for this evening. I'm just going to remind everyone of our purpose as a network before we go much further, and the qualities of our spaces, the kind of ground rules, if you like, for how we like to be together. Yeah, so the qualities of our spaces are the ground rules that we've agreed for our spaces together. We also do a bit of an update on race and racism in the news since we last met back in June, I think it was, wasn't it? And then we'll get into our main topic with Rob Taylor, decolonising the curriculum. And we're not going to do breakout groups this evening. We want to have just an open Q&A, really. First of all, for Rob, and then if anyone else is involved in this area of looking again at the curriculum of our children and our young people in our schools and colleges, then it'd be great to hear what you are doing. And if Lavinya can or Aisha can give us a little bit of information there from what they do as well, that'd be fantastic towards the end. Then just want to share some coming events that are coming up. And I've mastered the QR code generator. Welcome to the 21st century, I hear you say, Adrian. And so I will put a few QR codes up later. So if you want to have your reader ready, you can get directly to some of the sites. And one of those being the donation site for Black Curriculum, because we do want to support, if we possibly can, the Black curriculum and the work that they're doing. So that's a bit later. Some ideas for future sessions, talk a little bit about that because this is our last session of 2024. So I'll talk about what's planned next. And then what we usually do is we encourage people to stick around if they want to at 9:30, which is when we turn the recording off. If you'd like to continue just having a conversation or a catch up with each other. And I've been delighted that so many have stayed for that part of our evening as well. In fact, I've had to close it down a number of times because we haven't been able to stop. But that's fantastic end to the evening as well. So that's the agenda that we have for you. So just a reminder of our aims as a network. We aim to become true allies of people of colour in the fight against racial injustice. We deliberately call ourselves aspiring white allies because we don't really have the right to call ourselves allies. It's those that we ally with that have that right, which is why we have a council of reference, of which we have at least a couple of members here, Irene and Roy this evening, who keep us true to our aims and make sure we don't get above ourselves too much. But I know they are also very keen to make sure this isn't just a talking shop, but we are making a difference at the end of the day. We also need to learn about ourselves as white people, our histories and our privileges, and our impact on the world. We want to learn about people of colour, their histories, experiences, and perspectives. But we want to be geared towards actions I've just mentioned. So this isn't just an intellectual space, but this is really a practical space. Well, what difference does it make to our practice, to our languages, to our language, to our activity in the world, in the relationships, friendships, and work settings that we might find ourselves in? What can we do to make a difference? Just to emphasize, everyone is welcome in our meeting, both aspiring white allies and people of colour, those from the global majority heritage, who can be co-mentors with us, that can journey with us. We are very grateful for their presence as well. In terms of the qualities of our spaces, and I guess we do have a starting point of believing that the curriculum does need to be decolonised, and we need to think about decolonisation in much broader ways as well. But we also welcome different views here. We want people to be able to express differing views, but we just ask that they're respectful and non-judgmental of each other. There aren't that many spaces that I know where you can have really good dialogue, where two different opposing views are really listened to well by the proponents of each view. So we want to try and create that kind of space here in the network meetings. Being aware of the intersectionality of experiences too. There are complex intersections between other protected characteristics as well. We want to be humble and curious. We want to be allowed to own our ignorance, to be able to say sorry authentically if and when we unintentionally offend. Sometimes we don't learn enough because we're afraid to make mistakes, and we just need to be have a bit more freedom here, that we are in a learning space, that we are able to make mistakes and say things which might offend unintentionally, and then to learn from those. But being really curious about views very different from our own, pausing before responding if we feel triggered is really important. We want to be mindful and heartful as well. Careful thinking before we speak, considerate in our contributions and language, emotional and empathetic. This shouldn't be just a rational subject. It's okay to be emotional about it, because this is it just should evoke our emotions as well as our rational brains. And so we want to allow for that and be okay with that, not rationalize away each other's feelings, but able to express them respectfully to one another. We also want to commit to be open and authentic, able to speak our own truths, sharing our own experience and perspectives, but also courageous, open to challenge and to be challenged, courage to confront ourselves and others when needed, but also confidential, so that what's shared is kept confidential to the context in which it is shared. And that's particularly the case for small groups, as I mentioned earlier. And just as I mentioned right at the beginning, we are recording this, but if there's anything which you say you prefer not to be on the final recording, then please let me know. I do make sure when I edit the recording that no one's faces are visible apart from the presenters. So just to reassure you on that as well. We want to be kind and other-centered too, sensitive to each other's needs, building relationships. Some people need more time and space than others to think and to speak. We also don't want to wallow in white guilt, which is very much kind of centering around the white experience, but we want to not to be defending our ego, but be about serving a greater cause. Sometimes it's appropriate to feel a degree of guilt particularly for our ancestors, but also for our current behavior, but then to move on from that, to be determined to do something different rather than stay in that space. So those are the qualities of our spaces, the ground rules, if you like. So race and racism in the news. What's been happening? My goodness, a lot has been happening since last time we met. So let me just bring out a few things here. We have our first Foreign Secretary of Caribbean Heritage in David Lammy. So that was good news, I think. Well, I regard it as good news. When the Labour Party were elected on the 5th of July. So that's some good news. There's not much more good news in what I'm going to share. The Runnymede Trust report on the far-right violence suggested that part of it was due to a failure of governments and our society in general to address institutional racism. So that was quite a hard-hitting report. And the UN have been very scathing of the UK government and public bodies, saying that we must curb a rise in racist hate speech by our politicians and public figures. It also highlights racial profiling in police practices and failure to address the legacies of colonialism and slavery, which is something we are trying to address here. But Donald Trump to the rescue. In the which town was it? Springfield, wasn't it, in Ohio? People were wondering where all their pets have gone, and Donald Trump informed us that the Haitian migrants have been eating them. Unfortunately, fact-checked, it didn't really add up to much. And although one cat that had gone missing did rather sheepishly come through its owner's door, and they said, it wasn't missing after all, hadn't been eaten. It's just returned home. So that's good news. But I love Kamala's expression on her face as she heard Donald Trump talk about that in that presidential debate. I wonder whether you saw that too. Now, this was quite shocking that the Home Office had been forced to publish a report on the Windrush scandal. I just want to quote from that report as well. No wonder they wanted to hush it up. They concluded that between 1950 and 1981, every single piece of immigration or citizenship legislation was designed, at least in part, to reduce the number of people with black or brown skin who were permitted to live and work in the UK. So we have a appalling record, I think you would perhaps agree, and culminating in scandals like the Windrush scandal recently. So that hasn't gone away and still needs to be dealt with. And then we had the police officers that were involved in I think, harassing actually of two of our successful athletes. That was Ricardo dos Santos and Bianca Williams, and Bianca won a silver medal at the recent Olympics in Paris. The treatments that they were given, apparently the PCs were told that, or it was reversed, their disciplinary, and they were given a right to go back to work. I think Bianca and her partner are challenging that in the courts. But yet again, it seems that when the police have not lived up to the standards they should be, they seem to have, I don't know, somehow escaped much of a disciplinary measure. On the very same day, we heard that the UK will give sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. I don't know whether anyone knew that we actually still own them, but a bit of the colonial past there coming to the fore in our news. Although, of course, we are retaining the right to have an Air Force base in that strategic island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So the empire, well, it strikes back, but it continues, certainly. And then, of course, we've got the Conservative leadership race. Will we have the first black female leader of the Conservative Party? A number of my black friends are not too happy with that prospect, considering Kemi Badenoch's statements over the years. In fact, I think she'd probably be pretty horrified that we are having this session here this evening based on some of those. But anyway, who knows? 2nd of November, I think the result of that election will be there, and we may have a black leader of the Conservative Party. Here in Streatham, we're still feeling quite acutely Chris Carber's death, and the Met Police officer involved in the shooting of Chris Carber is now on trial, and it'll be interesting to see how that materializes over the coming weeks and months. And just been sent this by Alex Renton from who's been one of our panel members in the past, from Heirs of Slavery, and he noted that Hamza Youssef asked a really good question in the Scottish Parliament. And this is a lovely statement. Scotland, regrettably, he said, played a leading role in the British Empire, an empire that enslaved and forcibly transported millions of people from Africa to British colonies. If we do not teach our history, including the darkest chapters, then we are doomed to repeat our past mistakes. So at last, a politician kind of naming it. British politician naming it. Unfortunately, since then, he has suffered quite a lot of racist abuse. It's been told that he's a racist and a hater of white people. So he's on the receiving end quite a lot of abuse himself at the moment. So our heart goes out to him for that. So those are some of the things that I've spotted. No doubt you've spotted other things as well. There's always plenty going on in terms of these issues. So on to our topic. In fact, this is the topic we covered last time in January. Well, it's not last time, but the last time we tackled the topic of decolonisation. Neil Charlton, one of our Council of Reference members, helped us with that. And we started just by trying to understand colonisation. And that session is recorded. If you want to access that on our website, you can tap into that. But today we are part two, looking at decolonising the curriculum. And as I said, I'm delighted that Rob Taylor can lead us in this session. Before we get into that, just wanted to kind of answer up maybe a couple of questions. Well, what do we mean by decolonisation and a colonised curriculum? I'm quoting here from the resources that Rob has helped to develop for the Cornerstone Academy Trust, because I think they're really well worded, actually. He would suggest that decolonisation rests on the belief that the end of empires in the 20th century did not necessarily mean the end of the colonial mindset, and it is this that is largely responsible for many of the harmful prejudices that children are exposed to in our society. Therefore, in the classroom context, decolonisation refers not to the end of empire, but to the teaching methods we use to avoid exposing children to the harmful biases contained in the colonial mindset and ensuring that they are involved in the process of knowledge creation. And I'll look to maybe Lavinya and Rob to kind of confirm this, but my understanding is that from a very young age, about 4 years old, is it? Children start to pick up the prejudices around them, start to pick up the stereotypes, racist and sexist attitudes around them. So
I
from a
think
very early age,
maybe even younger than that,
maybe
Adrian.
even younger than that. So, we really are talking about something which starts very, very young. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Rob to share his and to take us through the session. Rob, over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit first?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Adrian. Can everybody see that okay? Have you got that screen there?
Yeah, it's good. Thanks, Rob.
Okay. Well, just to start, thanks very much, Adrian, for the introduction. My name is Rob Taylor. I've been a member of the White Allies Network for some time now. I think the best part of at least 2 years, maybe a bit longer.
Yep.
Um, and as Adrian said, I'm a parent. I have two children. They're 8 and 5 now, and they both go to the same school, which is part of an academy trust called the Cornerstone Academy. And the school that they go to is in Exeter, where we live, and it's quite, for the area, for Devon, it's quite a diverse school. We've got probably, I would say, about 30% of the pupils are from various different backgrounds from around the world, sort of non-white, non-British backgrounds, I would say. And for Devon, that's quite diverse. I mean, probably if many of you are there in London, it doesn't sound very diverse to you, but for Devon, it is. Devon's one of those predominantly rural counties where we have possibly the majority of the county is probably, I would say, less diverse than average for the UK. And there's sort of two main islands of diversity in, say, I would say Exeter and Plymouth. And that's illustrated by the fact that the next school, the nearest school over to us in this particular academy trust, is about 3 miles down the road and outside of Exeter, outside of the city of Exeter, and is, I would say, about at least 90, if not 95% white. So it's really noticeable, having done this work with the trust, it's noticeable that the different demographics of each school are quite noticeable, and I think that's something that is quite noticeable in a lot of rural areas in the UK, and something I think that we probably need to sort of think about a little bit as well. I know that a lot of work around decolonising the curriculum sometimes is done or comes from more urban areas. And I think this might be it's one of the few things I've noticed where this has been done in a specifically sort of rural context. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's something that we want to pick up on in the when we have the discussion, but I just thought that was a sort of interesting little tidbit there to start off with. But first of all, I just wanted to give you a bit of background about just coming on from what Adrian did there, about what we mean when we say decolonising and what a decolonised even curriculum looks like. So first of all, if I can, there it is. So Adrian's very kindly given us the definition that I put in the teaching resources that I created for the school. I'll come on to a little bit more about what I did, what actually we did in the project in a minute, but just to go over and reinforce what Adrian said. Obviously, for the large part, apart from places like the Chagos Islands, the colonial empires no longer exist. But the ideas, the mindset that went with them, that somehow white European people are superior, that still influences us a lot. And what that looks like in schools is that we might only learn about the achievements of white Europeans. We might not acknowledge the historical presence and contributions of people from African, Asian, and other origins to European culture. We might be taught that there's only one way of learning about or showing that we understand something. And in a lot of cases, and this is something that I sort of want to challenge a bit more, only the adults get to decide what is taught. So that's very quickly what I mean when I say a colonized curriculum. So moving on to what a decolonized curriculum looks like, that very much means questioning those preceding ideas. So we might want to look at how we might learn about different people and their histories from all over the world. We might want to learn about things like innovations in maths, science and technology from African, Asian and Caribbean sources. Being able to learn in different ways, I think, is very important as well. There is definitely something to be said for acknowledging not only different worldviews and different outlooks, but also for acknowledging the ways in which our own neurology diverges and has an effect on how we learn. And then also one of the key lessons that I took out of this project and tried to give back was that learning that the curriculum is a construct, and that as a construct it can be questioned. It's not the sum total of all knowledge, and it should be a thing that's questioned and evolves from that questioning. And coming on from that idea, I do truly believe that if we're going to produce the next generation of children who are able to sort of help us move on from the kind of harmful biases that are present in society now, we do need to let them have a say about what they learn, get them involved in questioning it, get them involved in thinking critically about it, and from as early an age as possible. So just moving on very quickly to a brief history of the project and what I did and why. So first of all, the project started in around summer 2020. We were all in lockdown during that point, and I was taking the opportunity to do a bit of reading and do a bit of work. And I obviously was shocked, as I think everybody else here was, by the horrendous, awful murder of George Floyd. And I think that, like a lot of other white people, did shock me and motivate me to look at myself and ask myself some serious questions and start thinking about what I could be doing to try and change things for the better. And essentially one of the things that I alighted on was I felt that as a parent, I wanted to make sure that my children were learning in a way that didn't perpetuate these kind of biases that lead to awful things like that murder. And I wanted to do something myself as well. I wanted to contribute somehow. So what I did was I contacted both my children's school and my old school to ask if they wanted to do any work around sort of curriculum review and diversifying their curriculums, especially their humanities curriculums. So my background is that I did my educational background is that I did a degree in history and politics. I've always been interested in history. I sort of focused on a bit more on the humanities side of it, encompassing history, geography, and RE. And what I did initially was, as I say, reached out to my school and my kids' school. Unfortunately, my school was one of those who they were interested in doing an assembly, and it was very much a bit of a one and done, I'm afraid. And that unfortunately is an attitude that does still persist, but you know, we will work to change that. But fortunately, on the other end of it, my kids' school were really receptive. I think part of that was because the kids themselves, after they saw saw the stories about George Floyd on the news, they had written to their teachers asking for their curriculum to be diversified, which I thought that was amazing. You know, it still brings a bit of a tear to my eye to think about it now. And you know, and I thought, okay, right, you've asked for that, so I'm going to try my best to do what I can to bring that to you, because I thought that was a really brave thing to do, and I thought, what wonderful children. So so I started working with my kids' school. Initially, it was to do a curriculum review to add more Black history, particularly Black British history, into the curriculum. Um, Very soon, I realised obviously that I would need to that I didn't want this to be something that was like a sort of I didn't want this to be a sort of white savior type thing, and I didn't want there to and I wanted to try and get help and inspiration from as many sources as I could. So I tried to connect with some local academics who were working in and adjacent to education. I so I worked with the main people that I worked with on the project, and the main contributors were Dr. Riyad Gamor of the University of Exeter. I think on the slideshow, actually, there are those names there are linked, so you can actually go to a link to a bit more of an extensive bio on them and have a look at that. Riyad was amazing. He taught me so much about decolonisation, and I just wouldn't have been able to do any of this without any of these people, but Riyad in particular on decolonisation is fantastic. If you ever get the chance to hear him speak or to be involved in any work with him, please, you know, please, he is really great. Um, Also, Professor Nandini Chatterjee, who's a professor of history from Exeter University, was very, very fearless in her critique of all sorts of historical figures and opened my eyes to new ways of thinking about so many different aspects of history again. And this informs the work that I did with the in this project and these resources. And again, couldn't have done it without Nandini's uh, contributions. And finally, last but not least, Ruth Flanagan from the Department of Education at Exeter University filled in basically the yawning chasms in my knowledge of pedagogy and how teaching actually works. So again, this project wouldn't have happened without her and without any of those people. I did work with other people as well. I worked with obviously children from my kids' school, but also from another school who has a local youth champions group. I don't know if anyone's, or youth cultural champions, I should say. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that particular term before. They tend to be just groups of people that can be adults or children who are from a lot of quite diverse backgrounds and who commit to going out and doing work, educating others, their peers and other people on their particular background and trying to promote, as I say, diversity, inclusion, you know, acceptance, and generally just trying to let people know that difference is nothing to be scared of. And I think they do fantastic work, and certainly they were of amazing help to me. So this, although I'm here talking about it tonight, I do very much stand on the shoulders of giants, and I couldn't have done this without any of them. Um, so when I started the project, although as I said, I started off with a sort of review of Black history in the curriculum, I soon realised that I think I needed to expand it. And I read about the concept of anti-bias education, which I think works across a range of sometimes intersecting identities. So I've got those on the right hand side of the screen here, so we can see there's 7 of them. There's race and skin color, sexual orientation, gender identity, economic class, culture, family identity, and ableness. And these are all things that children will have. These are all identities children will have, and they will think about, and they will come across in other people in their school lives. So I think these are things that should be in the curriculum, should be taught about. All these different things should be represented in a respectful and appropriate way, and people should be, children should be able to find out that everybody is different. And I think one of the key things is just not raising a generation of children that are scared of difference. I also quite early on, I think in the work, particularly with Riyadh, with Dr. Gamor there, I identified the sort of colonial mindset's reliance on binaries. So, for example, the most obvious one I can think of is probably around sexual orientation, the sort of the gay straight binary. That's one that gets talked about quite a lot. It's almost, you have a sort of, it's an us and them mentality. It's quite, as it says, quite binary, quite black and white. And you have us on one side and them over there. And it tends to be, those people over there are wrong or bad somehow, and we're the good ones, we're the normal ones, we are, and it ignores the fact that most things, I think we're coming to the understanding these days that most things are a spectrum, certainly sexuality, and these things can even be, and again with the example of sexuality, these things can even be quite fluid. People's sexual identity or sexual orientation can change from time to time, and there are many different places on that spectrum, I think. So but I think the colonial mindset is one that relies on the kind of very limiting binaries, and uses that to promote that kind of us and them mentality that produces these ideas of sort of Eurocentric values, and the idea that white Europeans are somehow superior. This led me again to the concept of social constructs, those being sort of sets of these binaries that form almost a sort of maybe a worldview or a view of how things should be done. And these are called constructs because they are constructed by people. And we can tell they're constructs, certainly through the study of history, by the fact that they change over time. So going back to my example on sexual orientation, the way that the ancient Greeks and Romans felt and thought about sexual orientation is wildly different from how we think about it now. That's a very interesting thing to discuss, and I did try and weave that through the curriculum, the sort of curriculum review and resources that I produced for the school, as an example of how you can identify a social construct and how you can see it, how you can use history to do those kind of things. And that in turn led to seeing the curriculum as a social construct. It's a construct. It's largely constructed most of the time, I think, by teachers. Teachers construct these things, and also the government has a hand in it. They set out things like the national curriculum, again, another construct, which sets the parameters for what the teachers can construct. And it seems to be, it's quite rare in a lot of, certainly it was rare when I was growing up and being educated, that children got much of a say in it. And that, as you might guess, is something that I would like to see changed. So then I think I want to sort of end this slide on a bit of a message of hope. As I said earlier, you can see social constructs changing over time, and that means they can change, and if they can change, they can change for the better. And we can change this social construct of the curriculum if we try, I think. And so now I'd like to go on to showing you some examples of what I did in this, in my work with the school. So as I said, it started as a curriculum review. It ended up as a more sort of expansive thing, and I tried to produce a set of resources that the teachers and the children could use to develop their own curriculum over time themselves. They could take it, run with it, and use the concepts. There were examples in it of how these things could be done, and they could either take those and just use those, or and also my hope was that they would get used to that idea and then run with it and do their own thing. So a lot of my work with the school was about getting teachers and pupils used to this idea. And so this was the next 3 slides I've got are examples of how we did that. And this is they're from a lesson plan that I produced for the school, which is to try to encourage children to see their curriculum as a construct and to question it, and to get them used to these kind of ideas, because the week after that I was then going to go in and do a workshop with them. So it was to try and just get them thinking along these lines. So the way I did that was this was done with a group of year 6 pupils, so they are, I think, about 10 or 11, maybe a bit older, and they essentially had just learnt about the Anglo-Saxons. So they were doing British history, learnt about the Anglo-Saxons, which is, so far so vanilla. It tends to be one of those things like the Tudors that I've got a picture of there that we all tend to learn about at school, and we've got the Industrial Revolution there as well, and we've got maybe some sort of Greeks and Romans thrown in at the bottom. But they had in particular learned about the Anglo-Saxons, so I've got a picture there in the top left of Alfred the Great. I think that's the statue of him in Winchester, actually. So they'd learn about that. We're trying to, the thinking point at the top, why have these events or individuals ended up being written about by historians? Why have they ended up in your school curriculum on television shows? Why do we talk about them? The idea being that, well, basically we talk about them because we think they're important for British history. We think these are the sort of the foundations of it, and the foundations of why and how we live the way we do today in Britain. So the next slide is about asking, what else though could we have been taught about? What else could we be learning about? Could we have been learning about, maybe instead of or alongside the Anglo-Saxons? So what I've done as a bit of a counterpoint there is I've talked about the Abbasid Golden Age, which was happening roughly in the same time period as the sort of late Anglo-Saxon period and the reign of Alfred the Great. So essentially, the Abbasid Golden Age was a flowering of intellectual achievement in the Abbasid Caliphate, and it tended to be centered around what's now Iraq, Iran, Syria, Palestine, that sort of area. And a lot of the innovations, technological developments, and a lot of were about in that time are absolutely vital to the way we live today. So there's a lot of developments in mathematics and engineering, and we wouldn't have things like this. These things that we use every day, these just wouldn't be a thing without what happened during the Abbasid Golden Age. I wouldn't be talking to you now in the medium that I'm talking to you without the developments that happened there in the sort of 9th and 10th centuries in the Abbasid Caliphate. So the question then occurs, which of these two things, the Anglo-Saxons or the Abbasid Golden Age, had the greater impact in our lives in Britain today? Obviously the Anglo-Saxons have an impact on us because in the sort of political, potentially cultural sphere, we still have we speak English, which is a sort of Germanic language, it's development of the language that the Anglo-Saxons spoke. We have a system of laws that is quite Germanic in origin, it is Anglo-Saxon in origin. However, on the other hand, a lot of the things we do take for granted, as I said, like our phones, like the very communications technology we're using at the moment, wouldn't have happened without what happened in the Abbasid Caliphate. So I just wanted to get them to understand that there was more out there, and also to see their curriculum as a construct, and maybe just to have a discussion about it. I wasn't hoping to produce any particular answers to this question. I just wanted them to think and talk about it. And so what I did next was ask them to conduct what's often known in sort of history teaching as a significance inquiry, asking what is the significance of these two things for us and for how we live today. And doing that, I also tried to work in the idea of this amazing book here, Silencing the Past by Michelle Wolf-Trujillo, who talks about how the production of history, so things like the framing of school curricula, university curricula, things like that, have power because they determine what histories get talked about. And this book very much, I think it was written in the 90s, and it very much came up with the idea of hidden histories. It sort of pioneered that idea of some histories are hidden because they don't get onto curricula. So I didn't want it to seem like it was like I was having a total sort of dig at the teachers who produced this curriculum at my kids' school. So you know, I think you do have to say, obviously, it's impossible to include the entire span of human history or human knowledge in one curriculum. So yes, you do have to decide what you're going to put in and what you're going to not put in. I don't think it's possible to include everything, but I think what it is possible to do is to be reflective about it, reflect on what you're putting in, reflect on what you're not putting in, be open to changing it, and have children that are able to contribute to that process and allow them to contribute, allow them a say, and have more of a dialogue. So, what I'm trying to say, I think, with this slide is that, you know, I'm trying to reinforce that message that that history is or the history curriculum is a construct, and trying to get them to think, maybe I was trying to get them to realize that in this lesson, and then that would bring me into the workshop that I did with them next, which was about how biases affect us in our day-to-day lives. And that the idea of that was to try and get them to think, well, what biases might have affected our curriculum, and how we want to try and address that. So there's going to be the final slide on this this slideshow, which I think Adrian can share again with everybody, is that is a very short bibliography, which that book is included in. And so I would really recommend it if you want to read it and do a bit of further reading, particularly about history. And as I say, the how it's produced, it's an amazing book. One question I think that I'm going to preempt in terms of, you know, how this works practically. If we're going to ask children to sort of to think about how could we diversify and decolonize our curriculum, one question that occurs is, how do they know what they don't know? So basically, it's a very good question, and I think the best we can do for them in terms of in the school context is that make them aware that what they're seeing is a construct, it's not the totality of knowledge, and make them aware also that there are tools out there that they can use, like this website that I've put up on this slide here, which is called the Meanwhile Elsewhere site. It's produced by two teachers. It's a really good resource that you can use, and it's tailored more or less to the national curriculum. So you've got there on the left the kind of periods of history, and those correspond roughly to the national curriculum, I think, from about Key Stage 2 onwards. And essentially you can look at what was happening. So if you're learning about Britain between 1066 and 1485, you can click on the link there and find out lots of information and ideas for lesson plans and things like that on what was going on in other places in the world at that point in history. So that's that is a wonderful resource to start children thinking. And I think once you've done that thing of starting them thinking about it, you will find that they will go off and start doing their own research and trying to come up with ideas and things like that, which will be really useful and helpful. So there are things out there so that you can get them to think about what they don't know, if you see what I mean. So that again, that resource I think is linked again in the resources and in the slideshow. So if you want to go and have a look at it, I would again highly recommend it. Finally, these last few slides are just some pictures. I don't know how clearly you can see that. I tried to make it as big as possible, but again, these are just, the top one is the actual curriculum review. It's basically took the form of an Excel spreadsheet with some Word documents embedded into it. The Word documents have lesson resources and plans in them that fit in with the topics that are being discussed in the curriculum. I think this one is that picture is of the early years curriculum, and they're talking about their learning from religion, and a bit of philosophy taken from the British Council for Global Citizens. So this is part of the RE curriculum, and there's I don't know if you can see it, but there's some scaffolding resources there and also some activities. And this is and the bottom picture as well is part of the scaffolding resources. Any teachers here tonight will possibly know what I mean when I say scaffolding, but just for everybody else, it's scaffolding is basically, I've given them the resources, but the scaffolding stuff is really for the teachers to think about. It's practical help for how they can implement these kind of things and how they can think about it on a day-to-day basis. And the activity resources are there pretty much what it says on the tin. It's resources for this particular area and other sort of content. And then again, the bottom picture is taken from the sort of general scaffolding resources for the teachers. So it talks about the background to the project, the aims, research, the principles. And I wanted, and there's a bit there which is quite important about teachable moments. So having done a sort of curriculum review with the school, I was very keen that it didn't stop there, and that this kind of anti-bias attitude and anti-bias and decolonial curriculum extended to the whole school day almost. So that's the sort of teachable moments bit there, where I've given various examples of how teachers might implement this, sort of outside of the classroom or outside of like sort of pre-planned curriculum. Because I think it's very important that kind of ethos sort of goes, throughout the school. It's all very well sort of learning and having a lesson plan that is sort of decolonised, but if you go outside into the playground and the same old attitudes are on display, I think it really does need to be embedded throughout the whole school and throughout the whole sort of day and throughout everybody's career in the school. And then finally, here's a few more things that I've done that I did for the teachers in terms of the scaffolding resources. It's looking at those. This is again an introduction and framework, identity areas, looking at those 7 areas that were on the previous slide, talking about likely obstacles, any resistance that they might find from other teachers, from pupils, from parents. Luckily enough, when this was implemented in my kids' school, there didn't seem to be an awful lot of resistance, which I thought was good, was positive. But it is there, and it does happen. We have to be, aware of it and ready to deal with it in a positive way. And then there's various checklists for accessing sort of visual materials for classrooms, and other types of more tactile materials as well. Checklists for finding and selecting books, dialogue guidelines for sort of more unscripted conversations that you might have. There's a couple of methods there which are sort of about which tie back to what Adrian was saying earlier about our aims and principles in this group, about how to have respectful discussions with people, disagreeing respectfully. and disagreeing agreeably, I think is a term. Doing that and being able to do that, but also at the same time holding a line and saying, look, no, this is what we have chosen to do in our school, and we're not going to be, we're not going to be blown off course. But at the same time, we respect everybody's viewpoint, but this is really what we believe in, and if you believe that strongly that you don't agree with it, then maybe this isn't the school for you. So this is, but it's very much about trying to help teachers hold that line. Then there's a little bit about classroom agreements, which I think is more a sort of, again, it's another way of trying to get children to be able to influence how things work in school. There's about having a sort of I think a lot of schools do this, having a sort of contract in the classroom about how we treat each other, how we talk to each other, what we do with our bodies, what we do with our words, those kind of things. And then how we will interact with our teachers and with everybody else, both inside and outside the classroom, and how we will deal with issues when they arise. And then finally, a book list. There's a sort of, I think that was included in the resources, wasn't it, Adrian? So it's again available for sharing, and a bibliography of everything that I used to create these resources for the school. So,
That's great.
yeah, lovely. So,
Yeah.
just again, to come back to something Adrian was saying earlier about this and about how what we are trying to do here is not about wallowing in white guilt. Now, I very much, when I did this project, I did not want it to be an expression of my white guilt. I wanted it to be useful for the people that it was intended to be for children in general, but also for children from various different marginalized backgrounds, backgrounds that are marginalized here in the UK. I wanted it to be for them. So I think it's incumbent on me to question and assess my own project and how it went, and ask myself, would I do anything differently, and question myself about whether did I spend my time wisely and well here, and to be critical of it myself, to try and stave off that kind of the kind of trap of just doing something to assuage my own guilt. So how successful has it been? It's difficult to tell. I do see occasional flashes of it in my kids' curricula when I look at the school's it's a Microsoft school, so they're all on Teams, and you've got things on OneNote about the curriculum, so I can look at it and I see it has influenced it, but perhaps not as much as I would like. And I'm yet to see a great deal of evidence of the children really having more of a say in the production of the curriculum. There was a plan at some point to write an article about this project in a journal. It's Primary History, it was called, which is a history journal for history teachers working in primary schools. And that was going to try and raise the profile of it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get that off the ground because we couldn't get all the contributions from the teachers in time for the deadline. One thing that did make me realise is that, and I don't want that to sound like I'm having a go at the teachers. I'm really not. I understand that they are incredibly busy, and when you look at what they have to do in a day and what all the different things and demands upon them, it's insane. And so it's not them, it's not their fault. And I think maybe I should have been a bit more aware of, or I would have liked it if I was more aware, or I'd picked up earlier on that and perhaps thought a bit more about other ways of sort of creating the change that I wanted to see. That sort of leads me on to the next question. With hindsight, would I have done it another way? Possibly. Looking back on it now, I think because this is something that it's one of those things that, because with the national curriculum as it is at the moment, these kind of things, these kind of areas are the kind of things I've talked about in terms of decolonising the curriculum, widening it out to other areas of world history, things like that. They don't get measured. And unfortunately, I think it's one of those cases where if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done at the end of the day. It doesn't get, it's some, teachers have all these different demands on them and they tend to focus quite reasonably on the stuff they're going to get measured on. And everything else is a sort of is a nice to have. And I must say my kids' school have done really well. They've really tried, but again, there comes a point where they have to focus on what they are getting measured on. So that's raised the question in my head: would I have spent my time better trying to do more sort of influencing, sort of more lobbying work, that kind of thing, more kind of political lobbying work, trying to get change from the top rather than working at it from the bottom as I had done? It's an open question. I think I'm not quite sure myself. I think maybe back in 2020 when I started this, we had a different government, obviously. I think asking that particular Tory government to do this kind of thing with the national curriculum would have been pushing on a firmly closed, barred and locked door. So I decided that I wouldn't necessarily focus there. And I don't think at the time that was necessarily unreasonable. But today, I think we are at a different stage. So I would like to put out there the idea that maybe if there's others of you out there working in this space or looking at this and thinking, and I thank you to Adrian for his really kind words on it, but maybe this is a bit of a product of the past. Maybe this is a historical, piece of historical evidence in itself, insofar as it's of its time. It's of 2020, it's of 2021, 2022. Is it still of 2024? And where we find ourselves now with a new government. I note that the new Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, in the wake of the awful race riots recently, said that we needed to be teaching more critical thinking in schools. And I'm very hopeful that that might translate into some sort of movement on the curriculum. Who knows? Maybe. And maybe I would suggest that people wanting to work in this kind of area now might want to look at whether, or question, whether the amount of resource we put into this, because it is doing this work that, as I'm sure Lavinya and Aisha will be able to tell you, doing it is hugely resource intensive and quite difficult. And could we look at things, to support people like the Black Curriculum who are doing wonderful work on school curricula? Could we look at ways of, could we look at how we might leverage what influence we have to try and get the kind of change from the top that we'd like to see, that would change the national curriculum to make it more amenable to this kind of work? That's something I think we, at this point in time, possibly should think about.
Rob, thank you so much. I want to allow plenty of time for questions and also for Lavinya and Aisha to share something as well. So can we draw to a close at this stage? Is that all right?
No problem, no problem. So I think,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much for listening, and thanks very much for your time.
Yeah. So if you could stop sharing your screen now, that would be helpful. I just to mention actually, because I think Rob alluded to it, but he is willing to share all of these resources, and we will put them on our resource board. Just to give you a flavour, this is just a couple of pages I'm putting up here from what I've looked at, and I'm certainly learning a lot from looking through some of this material myself. I'm not going to, we won't have a chance to read all that, but it's well, from my layperson's view, it looks really good, and I love the comments.
I think there's a comment on there from I've put in a few quotes from the letter that the children wrote,
That's right.
I thought was really powerful, so I've tried to sprinkle it through.
Yeah. So that will be made available to you. So thank you so much for that, Rob. I want to give Lavinya and Aisha a chance to talk in just a moment, but are there any questions first for Rob on what he has just shared? I think it's probably worth just pausing for a minute to see what questions people have on what has just been shared. Either stick your hand up sort of physically or on the or using the the usual means of doing that in Zoom, or stick something in the chat. I'm very happy to take questions at this stage. Aisha, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, Rob, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you. That was really comprehensive. It's really thought out in terms of the approach you've taken to the research and the way that you have embedded it. And, you know, I really loved the way that you had laid it out in a kind of strategic laddering way for teachers to adopt it. But, you know, someone else that works inside of schools and alongside adjacent to schools, I completely empathise with where you ended in the end, where you landed in the end, and that the time and resource on teachers is crazy. And actually they, you know, the way that they are judged is essentially outcomes and what's measurable there. So there is, you know, a greater will, I find, actually to want to do a lot of this work when the evidence has base for the work has been made. Now, I actually have a question for you, which is kind of along the lines of making the case for the work. So I know that you had a, you know, very receptive academy, as it were, and that probably landed from one head teacher. But was there any work that you had to do in terms of making the case across the academy, and maybe to different heads and, you know, different SLT groups, or was that something that was almost done for you because you landed with that one person that
I think it was,
pushed this work?
I think it was the latter thing, actually. Yeah, it was. I had there was a very receptive head of humanities who took it, made the case, and in general, I didn't get the impression that there was a lot of resistance in any case. I think it is a nice school. I will say that it's a decent school. They try, you know, they do try their best, and I think, yeah, as I say, I didn't really have to do much making of the case. I think I got a few questions, you know, the definitions of what a colonized curriculum, what a decolonized curriculum are, come from that. You know, there was but I never felt that the questioning was, they weren't questioning the whole thing. They were just questioning the terms that were used, essentially. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't the kind of, you know, why are we doing this kind of question. It was more, you know, what does that mean? And, you know, I'm quite this, how can I understand it better? So yeah, and so yes, I imagine, you know, I didn't feel that at the time, as I said, my school, my old school, were very much, you know, we'll do an assembly on it because it's topical, and that, oh, that's done, we've done that, now off we go, which wasn't great, you know. And I didn't feel I had, you know, just sort of working at it largely, you know, on that side of it, at least sort of on my own, I didn't feel I had the resource to sort of push it too far. It's a very difficult case to make, I think, sometimes, if there is, you know, a lot of resistance. And again, as you say, it's very easy for schools not to do it if they don't want to, because it's not measured, it's not part of the curriculum. So again, sort of coming back to my point from the end, there is, you know, maybe we are at a bit of an inflection point now. I don't know, you know. It's an opportunity, certainly, to push change, I think.
I mean, that was why I asked the question. So I think, you know, as much as we sit in these spaces and we know what we know, and we know why we're trying to do the work, we know the evidence base for it, and we know, I suppose, a moral case for it. Ultimately, when we're with these institutions, I think it's equally as valuable and helpful in these spaces to share what worked. You know, what are the business cases or other cases that we can make to make that cut through, because we know clearly the moral case is not enough. And so I really, really liked how you link that to kind of critical thinking, but, you know, from the ground up. You know, it's the first time I've come across this concept of the curriculum being a concept, but I think it's absolutely valuable, particularly when we're engaging young minds. So I guess that leads on to a sort of another question that I have for you, which is, you know, you spoke about this idea of decolonizing the curriculum because it offers there's an intellectual approach to this. It offers, you know, different perspectives. But, you know, did you then find any challenge then when you try to transition that down to taking it out of the classroom and out of the curriculum to the behaviors of teachers? Because you said, you know, if we're thinking about bias in a curriculum sense and how they're formed, what about how we kind of engage with these interpersonally? Did you find any, not necessarily just even in the individual teachers, but in the structure, was there any challenge there?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to get people to think in that way because it's quite a foreign concept. Sometimes we tend to like to think in the sort of that way. It's easier, certainly. And one thing I did do was as alongside these resources, I had workshops. I mentioned the workshop with the kids. I had a workshop with the teachers as well. So myself and some of the academics that I worked with, Dr. Gilmore and Ruth Flanagan, we did a workshop with the teachers where we discussed this. We went through, we did a few exercises with them, trying to get them to think about biases and what our biases are, what we Ruth and I talked about what biases that we had and biases that we noticed in ourselves and how we did that, and tried to take examples from day-to-day life. And part of the scaffolding resources that I produced as well, it sort of speaks to that point. It gives examples. There's a couple of other books that are mentioned in the bibliography in the slides that are sort of anti-bias education books, which are they're written by American teachers, and so a lot of the examples are quite American in terms of context, but a lot of it does translate to this country, and it will definitely work. So there's a lot of stuff in there that is designed for teachers to use on a day-to-day basis, and to think about how they act and how they react to things that might happen either in or outside of the classroom, in the playground, whatever, in the corridors, whatever, wherever it may be in the school. And that's that kind of idea of trying to making it not just about the curriculum, but about.
Thanks. There's a couple of other people who've got their hands up. So sorry to kind of butt in there. I'm conscious that we're a bit behind schedule, but Neil, I think, had his hand up next. I think I want to bring Olivier in after that. So Neil, what's your question?
Yeah, I just wondered, Rob, did you get any pushback from any comments fed back from parents?
No.
I'm pleased to hear that, because in the school that I'm kind of going into occasionally, I'm talking to the headmaster about stuff like this. I'm not an educator, so mine's more on kind of for the teachers' sake, putting into their welfare, really. But the head said that this is a secondary school in the Midlands, and he said that the parents, some of them are really horrendous in terms of their attitudes. So when they've tried to do stuff, the parents are putting complaints and all sorts of things. So it just depends where you are, I think. I wonder, in terms of your catchment area. And
I mean, I don't know what precise area of the West Midlands that your school's in, Neil, and obviously you might not want to say on here, but looking at the kind of area that we're in, as I said at the start, Exeter's a bit of a sort of island of diversity in Devon, and I think it's quite noticeable. People, I think, come here a little bit because of that. So it's almost like a place you come because of it. And so I think those kind of like attitudes might be less likely as a result. We've got lots of big employers right here. There's a huge hospital here. The Met Office is here. EDF, lots of big companies, big employers. They tend to attract people from all over the world, and it's I just, and particularly we've got a lot of new housing going up in this area around the school as well at the moment. It's quite a growing area, and it's attracting people from a lot of very diverse backgrounds. So I think, based on that, I think that's possibly one of the reasons why I didn't experience the kind of pushback that you are.
I think I'm just going to say, Olivier, I think had a similar kind of question. Is there anything you want to add to that, Olivier? If you want to unmute and just add on that, or was that kind of answers your question too? So you're muted at the moment. I don't know whether you're trying to speak or not, but there's some noise around him, he said. I mean, the question he put in the chat was, I'd like to ask about whether there's any pushback from parents. And should parents be consulted before altering what their children are given to learn? The reason he's asking is because this type of initiative was vehemently resisted in places such as Florida, in the US, for example. Anything you want to add, Rob, to your answer to Neil?
I think it's a good question on should parents be consulted. I mean, to some extent, parents don't really get consulted massively when the government brings out a national curriculum. I don't remember being consulted about the last one when it was changed. So, you know, to some extent, you know, how much, I guess you sort of, as a parent myself, you sort of take it on trust that certain things will be done in school and certain things won't. But I guess the other thing is that I don't think there's any kind of requirement, as far as I'm aware, to consult parents in terms of curriculum change and things like that. And I think as long as schools are pretty much following the national curriculum, if they have to, obviously private schools and certain other schools don't have to necessarily, but they as long as they're following the national curriculum, I think the idea is that most parents can be assured that's basically what they're getting taught. So I mean, I think there was an exercise where these resources were put in front of the parent teacher committee at the school, and to be honest, there wasn't a great deal of feedback from it. So I think it was fairly positive. So we did consult to that extent, and I think it's difficult to, you know, I think you could spend a lot of time consulting and not a lot of time doing anything. So I think it comes to a point where, you know, you can do your best to make parents aware of it. But certainly I didn't, again, as I said to Neil, I didn't receive any pushback from parents on any of this, which I think I was, by the sounds of it, lucky to not get that.
Thanks, Rob. I'm sorry to be a bit conscious of the time. I think maybe we can take more questions from you for you, Rob, after the 9:30 watershed. Is that okay? Because I want to give just at least 5 minutes or so for Lavinya and for Aisha to share a little bit about the Black Curriculum's work, which is just so pioneering and important in this area. So, Aisha, are you speaking on behalf of Lavinya at the moment because she's not feeling too good?
I can talk, but I'll give space to Aisha.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you so much, Rob. That was great, and it was really amazing to see the breakdown, as Aisha said. Yeah, I think I can resonate with a lot of the things that you were saying about the journey of going into schools, and perhaps also empathize on some of those points of contention as well. I'll get into the Black curriculum in a second, but I just wanted to bring attention to the Labour government that we have now, kind of consulting the public at the moment on their curriculum review. So it's not what goes into the curriculum, it's just a review on the current curriculum. So they're seeking feedback, and like some areas that they're looking at under the curriculum is the content, and specific sections that are relevant to us is, I think, a broad and balanced curriculum. And I think there's section 3 and section 5. So if you have time, I think it's open to the 22nd of November. So have a look. But it goes back to your point, Rob, around this is a construct, right? And the DFE are really much, they're in control, even though they say they're not, they're like impartial. They are not. They are a will to, what the government's desire is. And, we've experienced this when we approached them back in 2019, and they said, go speak to the ministers because it's them that shape it, but the ministers pass us back to DFE. So there is this kind of ongoing loop there. And I think when we're also thinking about the content itself, in terms of delivering providing resources to teachers, I think because of that very limited confine that you explained, there is a lot of teachers that will happily take these resources, but they're overburdened and under-resourced, which means that sometimes our solution, which is well-meaning, actually acts as a barrier to further study and further engagement in this area. So it's like, we don't, as organizations, want to become the solution for teachers. We want teachers to be empowered to be able to do this themselves, but the fact is that they don't have that much time. So yeah, I think our focus at the Black curriculum is really, has always been the students, getting them to see themselves as part of the British story, and most importantly as global citizens, as Britain has always been connected to the rest of the world. And yeah, we want to empower all students with a sense of identity, and that identity can look like a cultural identity, it can look like national identity. And I think the national curriculum does a disservice in a way, because you don't really get to learn much local histories, or there's not much focus on the local histories, and I think there's much power in that. So yeah, over the last 5 years, we've worked with over 10,000 teachers across the UK, training them on racial literacy and much more. And we have 2 key programs for students. One is called the Springboard program, so that pairs music and Black history. Again, getting students to kind of look at the world critically, but through the lens of music, which is a form of culture and a life force that I think sometimes is, yeah, again, the arts is not funded well in schools. So it's just another way to engage in histories that maybe are not recorded as well, and helping students to embrace different forms of learning. And then we have the National Ambassador Scheme, which is an arts award similar to the Duke of Edinburgh awards. They get accredited and they can use the points on their UCAS, and it's all around Black British history and getting them to kind of become campaigners and researchers in the area of Black history. And then they get pathways into careers like art and also kind of finance stuff. So we've partnered with PwC and like Papier and some other creative like organizations. So I think, yeah, I mean, the impact that we've had is great. I think there's more that we could push for, and I'm hoping that this is the time to kind of as I've said with Aisha, we've spoken so much about this. This is the time to kind of review what we actually want from this government, what we're asking for. And even though that is a tool, this new curriculum review for us to engage in, it's not the only way that we can go about to bring change. So yeah, check out our website. Thank you, Adrian. And we have loads of resources free, and some books and stuff like that as well for all students and teachers. I'm going to hand over to Aisha, and Aisha and I have just set up something else, which I'm going to allow her to plug.
So thank you, Lavinya. So I guess my work, although in a separate organisation, is adjacent to Lavinya's, and I suppose it supports everything that's been said here, or what's come out, in that this work is not being led by the DFE, and it's kind of incumbent upon individual teachers or individual school leaders to take it up. So we do that. Maybe the prior piece, where you don't have the advocates in the environment that are going out and seeking organisations like the Black Curriculum, or people that are open to listening to people like Rob and asking, inviting in their expertise. But we go in and do the initial piece, which is, you know, making the case for anti-racism work and actively speaking to it. And so, you know, initially, although we might be called in to deal with, you know, racial literacy, which some teachers are struggling with, or off of the back of, you know, a racist incident that the school is in kind of disarray about, actually our kind of ethos is we go in there and we tell you why you need to do this work and what the structural picture is and the understanding, and actually just kind of bear witness to some of the inequalities that exist. And so that might be looking at biases, or it might be looking at, you know, the role of curriculum integration and the benefits for it, also curriculum diversity and the benefits of it for not just, you know, the Black pupils in your environment, but for all pupils. And it was really interesting. Lavinya and I were having another chat earlier on about, you know, the movements for this work. And although you had said, Rob, that you were surprised that parents hadn't kind of given that pushback. It's something we've never received, so I wasn't surprised. And actually, I think that sometimes the leaders of institutions are so scared of all of these things that they needn't be scared about, because what we're seeing is so many people out there in society that have not been dissuaded by kind of societal narratives, the things that are coming out in the news, or the kind of subversive messaging, want this. And that, I think, is led so strongly by young people and students. And we have, I think it's for all of us to recognize that we now exist in a world where, you know, these different narratives come in. Social media definitely aids that. But students have questions and they want to learn about, you know, the rest of the world. They want to learn about different perspectives. They want to learn why we are who we are, why we are who we are, how we've got here, and they want to be able to associate with the world more widely. So we do that kind of systems piece. We talk to teachers, we talk to institutions, schools, about, you know, the benefits of this work. So we can link it either to critical thinking, we can link it to student outcomes, we can link it to academic engagement, actually, because this isn't just the moral piece, this isn't just even beyond, you know, the critical thinking piece. Actually, we also know that, you know, with the changing demographics of society, that the outcomes when the curriculum is diversified for all students is better, because they engage with that material more. So that's a short introduction to us, but you know, it's really interesting to see. I didn't know this before coming onto the call, that a lot of you seem to be Streatham based. I'm born and bred in Streatham myself, and I know that you aren't, Rob, but yeah, I'm an MAT. Sorry, I'm a trustee of a Streatham based MAT multi academy trust. So yeah, it's, you know, for us it's looking as an organization, and for me as an individual, looking at the structural piece and making the evidence base for this work, in acknowledgement that, you know, the powers that be and the people that are higher up are not pushing this for us. And actually, I don't think that they understand the many cases for it. And I will end by saying that I completely and wholeheartedly agree with the definition of decolonizing, or I don't know why I'm tired, I've been talking all day, decolonization that you presented at the beginning. But I think actually this work has to start with, so my background is in communications, but has to start with meeting people where they're at. So interestingly, and as much as it pains me, the word even anti-racism is something that I don't lead with. I will say it once I'm, you know, in an environment, but actually I tend to lead with, you know, racial inclusion. It's just to get through the door, because often people have these kind of media-led reactions to certain terms, and I think decolonization is one of them. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be talking about decolonization, we absolutely should, but I think before we even say it, we have to preface with, this is what we mean, before we say it, because, you know, we've seen so much of this language, and you know, the human psychology is weaponized in the US context, which is why we have, you know, a reverse on some of the affirmative action initiatives, or, you know, pushback against critical race theory and all of this stuff. And, you know, these are, I think it's also worth us being very aware that these are independently very well-funded groups. And the more that we have success in pushing this work forward, the more that the pressure comes from those groups, for whatever their vested reasons and whatever their vested interests are. So I think it's just important that we're leading with kind of getting ahead of what will come back as we have success in this area. But I just want to land with saying, you know, thank you, Rob. I was really encouraged by the depth and breadth of what you had presented, and I would love to have another conversation with you after this call.
Yeah, thank you, Aisha. Yeah,
And thank you for having me, and Lavinya.
it's
Lavinya, thank you for inviting me.
I mean, do hang around, everybody, if you can. I can see you've got your hand up. Would you mind if I just finish with a couple of slides officially, and then I'll stop the recording, and people can hang around for conversation after that, and that'd be fantastic. But let me just finish off officially, if I can, before we continue our conversation. So yeah, so I put this up before. That QR code will take you straight to the Black Curriculum's website, and we encourage you to support financially as well as emotionally and any other way you can the work of Black Curriculum. It's been great to have Lavinya here this evening. Just to let you know, in case you're not aware, the UK Reparations Conference is coming up on next week, isn't it? 27th of October. And again, that QR code there will take you straight to the website of the APPG, who organised that. That's the parliamentary group, isn't it? I'm trying to remember what APPG actually stands for. I've forgotten.
Parliamentary group.
All
Thank you.
party parliamentary group.
All party, that's it, all party parliamentary group. Thank you for that. So that is coming up, and that's supported by those organisations on the right there. That's actually at the Quakers Friends Meeting House, and I know we have a number of Quakers in our network as well. In terms of our next year's programme, as I said, this is the last session of 2024. We are meeting as a steering group and council of reference on the 21st of November. If you have any thoughts about what you would like us to see us cover next year, then please do send them my way via the White Allies Network or website, or if you know my personal email address, adrian.lock@deeperleaders.com, you will find me there. In terms of some ideas we have already that we might choose from, a next part of decolonisation, and take what Aisha said in terms of making sure we explain what we mean by this, and maybe I'll put a little bit more up front next time for this if we cover this subject. But it really is a mindset, isn't it, that affects not just white people but also black, brown, yellow-skinned people, the whole of the global population really is impacted by what has happened and in the past in terms of colonisation. We need to be much more aware of that. Hidden Racism Part 3, we thought we might explore the mixed heritage experience. What are the new unique challenges that people with mixed heritage face in terms of racism? I thought that might be useful to educate ourselves on. Also, there's some wonderful organisations that I'm just trying to pick my notes here. One of our network members, in fact, runs an organisation that looks into the past and of white allies and what we could learn from them. So that might be something we could do. But also, we'd just love to hear what people are doing in their area. So it might have one complete session in which people just share what they are doing, what some of the challenges have been, maybe what we can learn from what each others are trying to do to make a difference in our individual areas. We are also recording an interview with our very own Neil Samuel, who's on this meeting tonight. We're going to hear a bit about his background and experience, and also what he is doing, particularly in around the social services profession, which he has been associated with for quite a number of years. So that's going to be a recorded interview with Angela Young. She's also going to potentially do a book review of The Good Ally by Nova Reid. That we already know is a fantastic resource for us all. Yeah, so that gives you an overview about what some possible thoughts are. If you want to support any of those particularly, or have any other ideas, then do let us know. Just to remind you of our resource hub, over 200 resources, videos, articles, etc., that you can register on the website to have access to, all free of charge. Really useful and growing hub of resources. That's it from me. I'm going to stop the recording now. But thank you ever so much, Rob, for leading us this evening. It's been really useful to see what you have been doing, and we look forward to being able to share those resources more widely. And for Lavinya and Aisha too, for sharing the complementary works that you've been doing too. That's been fantastic. So look forward to seeing you again soon.